Okay, looks like we're live. Sorry about the delay, guys. OBS keeps denying me access. Let me know about the audio too, because you know me, I'm always having glitches. Okay, so witchcraft, spells, and astrology, things that I generally kind of shy away from. But I have a kind of an interesting insight, I think, into an aspect of this. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. We were going through some ritual, and he was going on and on about, for this particular energy, Monday at these hours, and you must have pearls and be dressed in white, and the wand must be cut from hazel and in one swipe with the left hand. And, it's like the only tool you need is your consciousness. What is all this gibberish? Really, But I think I actually can explain it scientifically, which is a trip. And it's going to take some backstory. So, bear with me. This is going somewhere. Before I do that, though, let me check in with the chat and see if anybody said anything about the audio, because I would hate to find out after the fact that it was a mess. Sounds good. Okay, great. Where were we? Okay, so if you follow me, you probably heard me talk about this whole Calabi-Yau neurons of the universal mind concept that I kind of stumbled upon. But in case you haven't, I'll give a quick overview. Basically, I had came to the realization that if there is a universal mind, specifically the veil that is talked about in certain occult traditions that translates the ideal into the actual, that there would be a mechanism for this that we could actually find, identify some, as yet undiscovered layer at the quantum level or something. And so then I thought, well, we need something to measure. And I have long suspected a connection between gold and light. And this connection is sort of a physical manifestation of allegory, basically. This is the universal mind. Basically, it's mechanism of operation or whatever. It's difficult to explain, obviously, but that probably will just about do it, right? So I figured that there must be some sort of resonance or, some kind of property that could confirm this connection between light and gold. And so I started thinking about it, and I just kind of intuitively compiled some mechanisms. And one of those things was Calabi-Yau manifolds. And I said in a stream that you could think of these as like the neurons of the universal mind. And I had no idea what they were, but when I looked it up and did research, I discovered they were exactly the thing I would be looking for if this thing was real. And so another big surprise came almost right away, right? I called them neurons, and they actually host things called D brains, an A brain and a B brain. And I had described this process as replication by means of reflection, and they use mirror symmetry to give mass, trajectory, and composition, I guess, to particles. And so that was all crazy because it fits like a glove. And then I found an interview on Friedman with a Langland's program researcher who described this resonant geometry that they had found through harmonic resonance at all scales of creation. So at a level more fundamental than particles, but then also in macro scale objects, right? And so I realized that this thing of aggregating pearls, white, certain types of wood, all of these things that have this sort of connection that on the surface or from a matrix-minded point of view would be metaphorical, I guess. But it's not. these things are actually connected in their essence in the way that gold and light are, right? And so you could think of it as like all the constituents that compose some archetypal energy scattered into different forms, right? This is what manifestation is. This is what creation is. And so that, I think, is the sort of mechanical layer of spells and, you know what I mean? These correspondences. In fact, there's a book called 777 by Aleister Crowley that he supposedly plagiarized from MacGregor Mathers. But at any rate, it's basically a dictionary of these occult correspondences in gematria, spices, plants, colors. And he uses gematria to sort of prove the connections between these things. Yeah. And so I just wanted to share that because I think it's sort of a insight into how and why this stuff actually works. Anything else before we get going? Nope. I think that's it. So, chapter 16, Witchcrafts and Spells. What sorcerers and necromancers sought above all in their evocations of the impure spirit was that magnetic power which is the possession of the true adept, but was desired by them only that they might shamefully abuse it. The folly of sorcerers was an evil folly, and one of their chief ends was the power of bewitchments or harmful influences. We have set down in our doctrine what we think upon the subject of bewitchment and how it seems to us a dangerous and real power. The true magus bewitches without ceremonial, and by his mere reprobation, those whom he condemns and considers it necessary to punish. His forgiveness even bewitches those who do him wrong, and never do the enemies of initiates carry far the impunity of their injustice. We have ourselves witnessed numerous examples of this fatal flaw. The murderers of martyrs always perish miserably, and the adepts are martyrs of intelligence. That's great. The adepts are martyrs of intelligence. Wow. Providence seems to scorn those who despise them, and to slay those who would deprive them of life. The legend of the wandering Jew is the popular poetry of this arcanum. A wise man was driven by a nation to his doom. It bade him go on when he wished to rest for a moment. What is the consequence? A similar condemnation overtakes the nation itself. It is prescribed bodily. Men have cried to it, get on, for centuries, and it has found no pity and no repose. An example of this is, if you guys remember in the Night Kadosh, the Templars degree, every single person that played a role in the ultimate execution of the Templars came to meet a horrific end, every single one of them. A man of learning had a wife whom he loved wildly and passionately in the exaltation of his tenderness. He honored her with blind confidence and trusted her entirely. Vain of her beauty and understanding, this woman became jealous of her husband's superiority and began to hate him. Sometime after, she deserted him, disgracing herself with an old, ugly, stupid, and immoral man. This was the beginning of her punishment, but it did not end there. The man of learning solemnly pronounced the following sentence upon her: I take back your understanding and your beauty. A year after, she was no longer recognized by those who had known her. She had lost her plumpness and reflected in her countenance the hideousness of her new affections. 3 years later, she was ugly. 7 years later, she was deranged. This happened in our own time, and we were acquainted with both persons. I think I might know who he means. Rose. I don't know if the time period overlaps well enough, but it sounds like the story of Rose and Aleister Crowley. The magus condemns after the manner of the skillful physician. No, that wouldn't be possible. Sorry. Similar story, though. And for this reason, there is no appeal from his sentence once it has been pronounced against a guilty person. There are no ceremonies and no invocations. He simply abstains from eating at the same table, or if forced to do so, he neither accepts nor offers salt. But the bewitchments of sorcerers are of another kind, and may be compared to an actual poisoning of some current of astral light. They exalt their will by ceremonies till it becomes venomous at a distance. But, as we observed in our doctrine, they more often expose themselves to be the first that are killed by their infernal machinery. Let us here stigmatize some of their guilty proceedings. They procure the hair or garments of the person whom they seek to execrate. They next select some animal which seems to them symbolic of the person, and by means of the hair or garments, they place it in magnetic connection with him or her. They give it the same name, and then slay it with one blow of the magic knife. They cut open the breast, tear out the heart, wrap it while still palpitating in the magnetized objects, and hourly for the space of 3 days they drive nails, red-hot pins, or long thorns therein, pronouncing maledictions upon the name of the bewitched person. They are persuaded, and often rightly, that the victim of their infamous operations experiences as many tortures as if his own heart had been pierced at all points. He begins to waste away, and after a time dies of an unknown disease. This too has potentially, or ostensibly, I guess, some scientific plausibility because of entanglement. Entanglement. I can't remember the details of the study off the top of my head. If I find them, I'll post them later in the Patreon or even in a community post. But the things that were once part of us remain connected to us. And so it may be a bit of a stretch to say that if you have the hair of a person, you can use it to manipulate, by extension, the particles in their actual physical body. But there's at least a connection that has been established by science. Another bewitchment made use of in country places consists in consecration of nails to works of hatred by means of the stinking fumigations of Saturn and invocations of the evil genii. Then, in following the footsteps of the person whom it is sought to torment and nailing crosswise every imprint of his feet which can be traced upon the earth or sand, yet another and more abominable practice. A fat toad is selected. It is baptized. The name and surname of the person to be accursed is given it. It is made to swallow a consecrated host over which the formula of execration have been pronounced. Crowley actually did this with a toad at Lake Passaquoddy, I think it's called, in New Hampshire. He named it Christ and crucified it on a cross. Oh, but that's a tale for another day. Poor toad. The animal is then wrapped in the magnetized objects tied with the hairs of the victim upon which the operator has previously spat and buried at the threshold of the bewitched person's door, or at some point where he is obliged to pass daily. The elementary spirit of the toad will become a nightmare and vampire, haunting the dreams of the victim unless indeed he should know how to send it back to the operator. Do you guys know how zombies are made? This is a really crazy thing. A student of Richard Evans Schultes, who was basically like the psychedelic Indiana Jones, professor of, I guess, ethnobotany. I don't know if they called it that back then, but at Harvard. And he went into the jungle for 12 years and discovered all these crazy things like the blue orchid and a plateau in Peru where 99% of the vegetation contains psychoactive compounds. And one of his students, Wade Davis, got wind of the zombie phenomena in Haiti, and that it was a real thing. So he went to investigate, and he discovered that they were indeed real, that there were zombie slaves. Some of them were made to be prostitutes, and some were made to be slaves in plantations. And it turned out that this was done by collecting pufferfish venom, Datura metalloides, or anoxia, I can't remember one or both, and some other ingredients, and sort of refining it so that it was a potent topically active powder that could be placed on the threshold of people's doors. And just walking through it, I guess, is enough And so the witch doctor has a antidote, and the victim appears to be deceased. And when they're buried, the witch doctor, depending on how much brain damage he wants done, he waits, 2 or 3 days for a prostitute, up to 10 without death, supposedly. And once he administers the antidote, the person comes back to life. But scopolamine, which is one of the constituents of this powder, makes people highly suggestible. So they retain that as a part of their brain damage. And so they'll do whatever they're told, and they're barely, able to speak. But that's what a zombie is. Just reminded me of this talk of toads in a bewitched person's door, this zombie thing in Haiti. Let us pass now to bewitchments by waxen images. The sorcerers of the Middle Ages, eager to please their sacrilegious, him whom they regarded as their master, mixed baptismal oil and the ashes of consecrated hosts with a modicum of wax. Apostate priests were never wanting to deliver them the treasures of the church. With the accursed wax, they formed an image as much as possible resembling the person who they desired to bewitch. They clothed this image with garments similar to his. They administered to it the sacraments which he received, and then they called down upon its head all maledictions which could express the hatred of the sorcerer, inflicting daily imaginary tortures upon it, so as to reach and torment by sympathy the person represented by the image. This bewitchment is more infallible if the hair, blood, and above all, a tooth of the victim can be procured. It was this which gave rise to the proverbial saying, "You have a tooth against me." There is also bewitchment by the glance, called the jettatura, or evil eye, in Italy. During our civil wars, a shopkeeper had the misfortune to denounce one of his neighbors who, after a period of detention, was set at liberty, but with his position lost. His sole vengeance was to pass twice daily the shop of his denouncer, whom he regarded fixedly, saluted, and went on. Some little time after, the shopkeeper, unable to bear the torment of this glance any longer, sold his goods at a loss and changed his neighborhood, leaving no address. In a word, he was ruined. A threat is a real bewitchment, because it acts powerfully on the imagination, above all, when the latter receives with facility the belief in an occult and unlimited power. The terrible menace of hell, that bewitchment of humanity during so many centuries, has created more nightmares, more nameless diseases, more furious madness than all vices and all excesses combined. This is what the Hermetic artists of the Middle Ages represented by the incredible and unheard of monsters which they carved at the doors of basilicas. But bewitchment by threat produces an effect altogether contrary to the intention of the operator when it is evidently a vain threat, when it does outrage to the legitimate pride of the menaced person and consequently provokes his resistance, or finally when it is ridiculous by its atrocity. The sectaries of hell have discredited heaven. Say to a reasonable man that equilibrium is the law of motion in life, and that liberty, which is moral equilibrium, rests upon an eternal and immutable distinction between true and false, between good and bad. Tell him that, endowed as he is with free will, he must place himself by his works in the empire of truth and goodness, or relapse eternally, like the rock of Sisyphus, into the chaos of falsehood and evil. Then he will understand the doctrine, and if you term truth and goodness heaven, falsehood and evil hell, he will believe in your heaven and hell, over which the divine ideal rests calm, perfect, and inaccessible to either wrath or offense. Because he will understand that if in principle hell be eternal as liberty, it cannot in fact be more than a temporary agony for souls, because it is an expiation, and the idea of expiation necessarily supposes that of reparation and destruction of evil. This much said, not with dogmatic intention, which is outside our province, but to indicate the moral and reasonable remedy for the bewitchment of consciences by the terrors of the life beyond, let us speak of the means of escaping the baleful influences of human wrath. So, man, what a obtuse way of explaining these things. One point that he made, basically is that the threat of hell has created far more evil than it has prevented. And for anyone that really understands the equations of existence, there is no evil that could be committed in the span of a single lifetime that would justify eternal condemnation. It may justify quite a lot of suffering, but not eternal suffering. And so right out of the gate, people have good grounds, if they are reasonable and aware, conscious, illuminated, to reject the whole hypothesis of hell outright. And it is also the inculcation of the capacity to believe in things that are obviously fantasy that has facilitated so much of that evil and exploitation and insanity. If you accept as a fundamental premise of existence something that is patently false like that, then you are susceptible to other great falsehoods. And as long as humanity is separated from truth, they are malleable and they are controllable by fear, and they're susceptible to institutional indoctrination. Not so in the case of those who are grounded in gnosis. The first among all is to be reasonable and just, giving no opportunity or excuse to anger. A lawful indignation is greatly to be feared. Make haste, therefore, to acknowledge and expiate your faults. Should anger persist after that, then it certainly proceeds from vice. Seek to know what vice, and unite yourself strongly in the magnetic currents of the opposite virtue. The bewitchment will have no further power upon you. Wash carefully the clothes which you have finished with before giving them away. Otherwise, burn them. Never use a garment which has belonged to an unknown person without purifying it by water, sulfur, and such aromatics as camphor, incense, and amber. A great means of resisting bewitchment is not to fear it. It acts upon the manner of contagious maladies. In times of epidemic, the terror-struck are the first to be attacked, right? Like, you guys remember the pandemic? The secret of not fearing an evil is not to think about it. And my advice is completely disinterested, since I give it in a book of magic, of which I am the author. When I strongly urge upon persons who are nervous, feeble, credulous, hysterical, superstitious devotees, foolish, without energy, and without will, never to open a book of magic. And to close this one, if they have opened it, to turn a deaf ear to those who talk of the occult sciences, to deride them, never to believe in them, and to drink water, as said the great Pantagruelist magician, the excellent Curé of Moudon. So along those lines, I talk about this a lot, but there have been at least 50 studies of which I am aware on nearly every continent over the course of 50 years that all came to the same conclusion in regards to demonic possession. There are entire nations that do not believe in it, and they do not have anything even resembling it ever. In Italy, where you have the most belief in it, you have the most instances of it. So the best defense, whether it's real or not, based on verifiable evidence, is not to believe that anything has power over you. Because guess what? You are a sovereign, and it doesn't. As for the wise, and it is time that we turn to them after espousing the cause of the foolish, they have scarcely any sorceries to fear save those of fortune. But seeing that they are priests and physicians, they may be called upon to cure the bewitched, and this should be their method of procedure. They must persuade a bewitched person to do some act of goodness to his bewitcher, render him some service which he cannot refuse, and lead him directly or otherwise to the communion of salt. A person who believes himself bewitched by the execration of internment of the toad must carry about him a living toad in a horn box. While we're on the subject of salt there, I'll give you a little clue to this, and it kind of ties back into that whole, the connection between this allegorical connection made physical that I was talking about in the beginning of the stream. The salt of mercury is being transmuted into light by the sun. So if you think about salt's role in the alchemical process and consider that recent development, they were viewing mercury through some spectral, I don't remember the word, but so they could see a specific spectrum of light, and they observed this tail coming off of mercury that was the salt and mercury being transmuted into photons by the rays of the sun. The fact that it was mercury that this is happening to is also wild, but again, a subject for another time. A person who believes himself bewitched by the execration and internment of the toad must carry about him a living toad in a horn box. For the bewitchment of the pierced heart, the afflicted individual must be made to eat a lamb's heart, seasoned with sage and onion, and to carry a talisman of Venus or the moon in a satchel filled with camphor and salt. For bewitchment by the waxen figure, a more perfect figure must be made, as much as possible in the likeness of the person. 7 talismans must be hung around the neck. It must be set in the middle of a great pantacle representing the pentagram, and each day be rubbed slightly with a mixture of oil and balm after reciting the conjuration of the 4 to turn aside the influence of elementary spirits. At the end of 7 days, the image must be burnt in consecrated fire, and one may rest assured that the figure fabricated by the bewitcher will at the same moment lose all its virtue. We have already mentioned the sympathetic medicine of Paracelsus, who medicated waxen limbs and operated upon the discharges of blood from wounds for the cure of the wounds themselves. This system permitted the employment of more than usually violent remedies, and his chief specifics were sublimate and vitriol. We believe that homeopathy is a reminiscence of the theories of Paracelsus and a return to his wise practices. But we shall follow up the subject in a special treatise exclusively consecrated to occult medicine. Contracts by parents forestalling the future of their children are bewitchments which cannot be too strongly condemned. I know a lot about that one. Children dedicated in white, for example, scarcely ever prosper. Those who were formerly dedicated to celibacy fell commonly into debauch, or ended in despair and madness. Man is not permitted to do violence to destiny, still less to impose bonds upon the lawful use of liberty. As a supplement or appendix to this chapter, we will add a few words about mandragores and androids, which several writers on magic confound with the waxen images serving the purposes of bewitchment. The natural mandragore is a filamentous root which more or less represents or presents as a whole either the figure of a man or that of the virile members. He is talking about mandrake. It is slightly narcotic, and an aphrodisiacal virtue was ascribed to it by the ancients, who represented it as being sought by Thessalian sorcerers for the composition of philters. In this root, the umbilical vestige of our terrestrial origin, is this root the umbilical vestige of our terrestrial origin? We dare not seriously affirm it, but all the same, it is certain that man came out of the slime of the earth, and his first appearance must have been in the form of a rough sketch. The analogies of nature make this notion necessarily admissible, at least as a possibility. The first men were, in this case, a family of gigantic sensitive mandragores, animated by the sun, who rooted themselves up from the earth. This assumption not only does not exclude, but on the contrary, positively supposes creative will and the providential cooperation of a first cause, which we have reason to call God. Some alchemists, impressed by this idea, speculated on the culture of the mandragore and experimented in the artificial reproduction of a soil sufficiently fruitful and a sun sufficiently active to humanize the said root. and thus create men without the concurrence of the female. Others who regarded humanity as the synthesis of animals despaired about vitalizing the mandragore, but they crossed monstrous pairs and projected human seed into animal earth only for the production of shameful crimes and barren deformities. The third method of making the android was by galvanic machinery. Before we move on from this, let's talk a little bit about Mandrake. So the legend is that if you heard it scream when you pulled it from the ground, you would die. So they used to starve dogs and tie a rope to the mandrake in order to harvest it. And it was also said that they only grew below gallows where blood and semen had touched the ground. And his reference to the possibility that we actually evolved from this plant is kind of a reference to Platonic metempsychosis. And they believed that every human soul had existed in lower forms like animals, plants, and before that, probably minerals and whatnot. So, yeah. And it's also an ingredient in the flying ointments, right? And the recipe for those was basically datura, mandrake, deadly nightshade, these kind of things, cooked down into a paste. And in one version of this ritual, the witches would apply the paste to the end of a broomstick and they would apply it through the vaginal walls. And this is where the popular Halloween image of a witch riding a broomstick and flying comes from. Just a little bit of fun bit of trivia there. One of the most intelligent automata was attributed to Albertus Magnus. And it is said that St. Thomas destroyed it with one blow from a stick because he was perplexed by its answers. This story is an allegory. The android was primitive scholasticism, which was broken by the Summa of St. Thomas, the daring innovator who first substituted the absolute law of reason for arbitrary divinity by formulating that axiom which we cannot repeat too often since it comes from such a master. A thing is not just because God wills it, but God wills it because it is just. And this is one of the most important ideas in the entire Hermetic Arcanum. The Pythagorean Illuminati of today call it the principle of sufficient reason. Back in the day, it was called the law of necessity. And it basically states that things are as they are because it's the only way creation could be, manifested, that things are predicated upon the laws as they are because it couldn't be any other way. And this is why we have equal parts light and darkness and, the whole thing. It is as it is because it must be. The real and serious android of the ancients was a secret which they kept hidden from all eyes, and Mesmer was the first who dared to divulge it. It was the extension of the will of the Magus into another body, organized and served by an elementary spirit. In more modern and intelligible terms, it was a magnetic subject. Okay, so now we're on to chapter 17, the writing of the stars. I'll check in with the chat real quick and see how you guys are doing. Okay, hello everyone. I don't see any questions or anything that needs addressing. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. You get access to 7 years now, I think, of patron-only material. Discord private chats we have once a week. I apologize to the patrons for missing the last one. I didn't realize that Inti Raymi, which is the Incan solar holiday, was Tuesday, and we had to leave on Monday to get there. So we will definitely do it on Monday. I rescheduled it for Saturday and realized we were taking my son to see a symphonic Pink Floyd in Cusco, so I had to reschedule it again. But normally we have it every week, and it's always really interesting. We have a highly intelligent group of people that are highly motivated to affect some positive change in the world and within themselves, and it's always a really inspiring thing to see, people collaborating and benevolent conspiracies forming, and so we do appreciate that. We're demonetized, so supporting the channel is a great thing to do. Chapter 17, The Writing of the Stars. We have finished with Infernus, and we breathe the fresh air freely as we return to daylight after traversing the crypts of black magic. Get thee behind us, Satan. We renounce thee with all thy pomps and works, and still more with all thy deformities, thy meanness, and thy nothingness, thy deception. The great initiator beheld thee fall from heaven like a thunderbolt. The Christian legend changes thee, making thee set thy dragon's head mildly beneath the foot of the Mother of God. Thou art for us the image of unintelligence and mystery. Thou art unreason and blind fanaticism. Thou art the Inquisition and its hell. Thou art the god of Torquemada and Alexander VI. Thou hast become the sport of children, and thy final place is at the side of Polichinello. Henceforth thou art only a grotesque character in our foreign theaters and a means of instruction in a few so-called religious markets. After the 16th key of the tarot, which represents the downfall of Satan's temple, we find on the 17th leaf a magnificent and gracious emblem. A naked woman, a young and immortal maid, pours out upon the earth the juice of eternal life from two ears, one of gold and one of silver. Hard by there is a flowering shrub on which rests the butterfly of Psyche. Above her shines an 8-pointed star with 7 other stars around it. I believe in eternal life. Such is the final article of the Christian symbol, and this alone is a profession of faith. The ancients, when they compared the calm and peaceful immensity of heaven, thronged in innumerable lights, to the tumults and darkness of this world, believed themselves to have discovered in that beautiful book, written in letters of gold, the final utterance of the enigma of destinies. In imagination, they drew lines of correspondence between these shining points of the divine writing, and it is said that the first constellations marked out by the shepherds of Chaldea were also the first letters of the Kabbalistic alphabet. These characters, expressed first of all by means of lines, then enclosed in hieroglyphic figures, would, according to M. Moreau de Martin, author of a very curious treatise on alphabetic characters, have determined the ancient magi in the choice of the tarot figures, which are taken by this man of learning, as by ourselves, for an essentially hieratic and primitive book. Thus, in his opinion, the Chinese Su, the Hebrew Aleph, and the Greek Alpha, expressed hieroglyphically by the figure of the jugular, would be borrowed from the constellation of the crane in the vicinity of the celestial fish, a sign of Eastern Hemisphere. The Chinese Chao, the Hebrew Bet, and the Latin B, corresponding to Pope Juan or Huno, were formed after the head of the ram. The Chinese Yin, the Hebrew Gimel, and the Latin G represented by the Empress, which would be derived from the constellation of the Great Bear. The Kabbalist Gaffarel, whom we have cited more than once, erected a planisphere in which all the constellations form Hebrew letters. But we confess that the configurations are frequently arbitrary in the highest degree and upon the indication of a single star. For example, we see no reason why a Ket should be traced rather than a Lamed or a Ayin. 4 stars will also give indifferently a Yod-He. I mean, I would assume that should be Yod-He Vav-He, or He final, as well as an Aleph final. We are therefore deterred from reproducing a copy of Gaffarel's planisphere, examples of which are moreover not exceedingly rare. It was included in the work of Montfaucon on the religions and superstitions of the world, and also in the treatise upon magic published by the mystic Eckartshausen. Scholars, moreover, are unagreed upon the configurations of the letters of the primitive alphabet. Okay, I think where this is all going, I don't know why he's going so deeply into this, but one of the problems with astrology is that if you look around the world, you will find all these different interpretations. And that's definitely a problem because it suggests it's not objectively true, any of it. There is a system that I'm aware of called human design that I just became aware of. My partner has gotten really heavily into it. And honestly, I don't really blame her, but it's not just based on astrology. There are readings that are done based on your birth, but the system is a synthesis of Kabbalah and a whole lot of stuff. So I'm not saying that there is no truth to it fundamentally, but in regards to whether or not we have the key to the legend, um, I'm not really convinced of that. The Italian tarot, of which the last Gothic originals are much to be regretted, connects by the disposition of its figures with the Hebrew alphabet in use after the captivity and known as the Assyrian alphabet. But there are fragments of anterior tarots where the disposition is different. There should be no conjecture in matters of research, right? And hence we suspend our judgment in the expectation of fresh and more conclusive discoveries. In other words, we'll refine this, and that's what I think our job is. That's why we're here. As to the alphabet of the stars, we believe it to be intuitive, like the configuration of clouds, which seem to assume any form that imagination lends to them. Star groups are like points in geomancy or the pasteboards of cartomancy. They are a pretext for self-magnetizing an instrument to fix and determine native intuition. That right there. Thus, a Kabbalist familiar with mystic hieroglyphics will perceive signs in the stars which will not be discerned by a simple shepherd. But the shepherd, on his part, will observe combinations that will escape the Kabbalist. Country people substitute a rake for the belt and a sword of Orion, while a Kabbalist recognizes in the same sign as a whole all of the mysteries of Ezekiel, the 10 Sephirot arranged in a triadic manner, a central triangle formed of 4 stars, then a line of 3 stars making the Yod, and the 2 figures taken together expressing the mysteries of Bereshit, the first word in the Bible in the beginning. Finally, 4 stars constituting the wheels of Merkabah and completing the divine chariot. Looked at after another manner and arranging other ideal lines, you will notice a well-formed gimel placed above a yod in a large dalet, a symbol typifying the strife between good and evil and the final triumph of good. As a fact, the gimel superposed on the yod is the triad pronounced by unity, the manifestation of the divine word, whilst the reversed dalet is the triad composed of the evil duad multiplied by itself. Thus regarded, the figure of Orion would be identical with that of the angel Michael doing battle with the dragon, and the appearance of this sign, so understood, would be for the Kabbalist a portent of victory and happiness. A long contemplation of the sky exalts the imagination, and then the stars respond to our thoughts. The lines drawn mentally from one to another by the primitive observers must have given man his first notions of geometry. Accordingly, as our soul is troubled or at rest, the stars seem burning with menace or sparkling with hope. The sky is thus a mirror of the human soul, and when we think that we are reading in the stars, it is in ourselves that we read. Gaffarel, applying the prophecies of celestial writing to the destinies of empires, said that not in vain did the ancients place all signs of eagle augury in the northern region of the sky. Calamities have been in all ages regarded as coming from the north to spread themselves over the earth by the invasion of the south. For this reason, he tells, the ancients represented in the northern parts of the heaven a serpent or dragon near 2 bears, since these animals are the true hieroglyphs of tyranny, pillage, and all oppression. As a fact, glance at history, and you will see that all devastations proceed from the north. The Assyrians or Chaldeans, incited by Nebuchadnezzar or Salmanasar, exhibited this truth in abundance by the destruction of the most splendid and most holy temple and city in the universe, and by the complete overthrow of a people whom God himself had taken under his special protection, of whom he especially termed himself Father. And that other Jerusalem, Rome the Blessed, has not it too experienced frequently the violence of this evil northern race, when it beheld its altars demolished and the towers of its proud edifices brought level with the foundations through the cruelty of Alaric, Genseric, Attila, and the other princes of the Goths, Huns, Vandals, and Alain? Very properly, therefore, in the secrets of this celestial writing do we read calamities and misfortunes on the northern side, since septentrion ponditur omne malum. Now the word yod he pe ket he, which we translate by ponditur, is also equivalent of the depingatur or scribitur, and the prophecy signifies equally all the misfortunes of the world are written in the northern sky. Before we go on too much, though, I want to point out what he was saying about how when we look in the stars and we read things, we're really reading within ourselves, right? I was putting together a post for my Substack, which you guys should all go and follow if you haven't already. Um, and one of the things that I was trying to describe is the reason why the mysteries were demonized and distorted and destroyed and outlawed in Egypt and Rome and demonized in the pop culture narratives of our modern times. And it has to do with the fact that the scientific paradigm, although not wrong, is incomplete. And since it framed the universe as blind and pointless and unintelligent, and we are but mirrors of our perception, avatars of experience informed by perception, we embody those characteristics that we perceive in the universe. And if you are initiated into a more holistic experience and understanding of the universe, then you are complete. And people that don't have these fundamental structural weaknesses and emptiness are sovereign and cannot be molded, manipulated. They are not, you can't govern them by fear. They're not susceptible to institutionalized narratives and indoctrination. So there's that. Gaffarel adds some prognostics drawn from the stars, as for example, the progressive weakening of the Ottoman Empire. But as already said, his constellated letters are exceedingly arbitrary. He states, for the rest, that he derived his predictions from a Hebrew Kabbalist, Rabbi Chomer, but does not himself pretend to understand him especially well. This passage was written before the Crimean War. I'm not sure what that's a reference to. Here follows the table of magical characters traced after the zodiacal constellations by the ancient astrologers. Each of them represents the name of a genius, be he good or evil. It will be known that the signs of the zodiac correspond to various celestial influences and consequently signify an annual alternative of good or evil. The names of the genii designated by the above characters are, for the ram, Sataran and Sarahiel, for the bull, Bogdal and Araziel, for the twins, Sagros and Sarahiel, for the crab, Radar and Fakiel, for the lion, Sagam and Saratiel, for the virgin, Iadara and Shaltiel, for the balance, Grazgarbin and Hadakiel, for the scorpion, Rehol and Sasael, for the archer, Venori and Saratael, for the goat, Sagdalon and Samakiel, for the water bearer, archer and Samakiel, for the fishes, Rasamasa and Vakabiel. The wise man who would read the sky must observe also the days of the moon, the influence of which is very great in astrology. The moon successively attracts and repels the magnetic fluid of the earth and thus produces the ebb and flow of the sea. We must therefore be well acquainted with its phases and be able to distinguish its days and hours. The new moon is propitious to the beginning of all magical works. From first quarter to full moon, its influence is warm. From full moon to the third quarter, it is dry, and from third quarter to last, it is cold. Here follow the special characters of all the days of the moon, distinguished by the 22 tarot keys and by the signs of the 7 planets. And that absolutely would be true, that the moon would have an influence on our ability to influence our experience. The juggler or magus, the first day of the moon is that of the creation of the moon itself. This day is consecrated to mental enterprises and should be favorable for opportune innovations. Are we really going through all 30 days here, 28 days? Pope Joan, or occult science. The second day, the genius of which is an Ediel, was the 5th of creation, for the moon was made on the 4th day. The birds and fishes created on this day are the living hieroglyphs of magical analogies and of the universal doctrine of Hermes. The water and air, which were thereby filled with the forms of the word, are the elementary figures of the Mercury of the sages, that is, of intelligence and speech. This day is propitious to revelations, initiations, and great discoveries of science. The celestial mother or empress, and we can check a lot of these things actually with AI really easily right now, and I'm going to do that as soon as we're done. The celestial mother or empress. The third day was that of man's creation. So is the moon called the mother in Kabbalah. Actually, though, you know what? It would help me if some of you guys would divide this task up with me. We can all choose a day, and that way I don't have to spend the next 36 hours sorting through all this data. So is the moon called the mother in Kabbalah when it is represented in association with the number 3. The day is favorable to generation and generally to all productions, whether to body or mind. The emperor or ruler, the 4th day is baleful. It was that of the birth of Cain, but it is favorable to unjust and tyrannical enterprises. Okay, so there's another bit of what's being laid out here is that it's all one thing doing one thing, right? So the tarot cards follow the progression of the moon because of this fact that it's really just a sort of holographic blueprint that everything is expressing in nearly infinite variations. The 5th day is fortunate. It was that of the birth of Abel. The lover or liberty. The 6th is a day of pride. It was that of the birth of Lamech, who was said unto his wives, I have slain a man to my wounding and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 is sevenfold. This day is propitious for conspiracies and rebellions. The chariot. On the 7th day, birth of Hebron, who gave his name to the first of the 7 sacred cities of Israel. A day of religion, prayers, and success. Justice, murder of Abel, day of expiation. 9, the old man or hermit. Birth of Methuselah, day of blessing for children. 10, Ezekiel's wheel of fortune, birth of I'm pretty sure what that's supposed to say is now I can't say it. Nebuchadnezzar, whatever. Nabuchodonosor. I'm pretty sure it's not. I just said it 5 minutes ago. You guys know what I mean. Reign of the beast, a fatal day. 11, strength, the birth of Noah. Visions on this day are deceitful, but it is one of health and long life for children born on it. The victim or hanged man, birth of Samuel. Prophetic and Kabbalistic day, favorable to the fulfillment of the great work. 13, death. Birthday of Canaan, the accursed son of Ham. Baleful day and fatal number. The angel of temperance is 14th day. Blessing of Noah on the 14th day of the moon. This day is governed by the angel Cassiel of the hierarchy of Uriel. Oh, the 14th. Okay. 15, Typhon or the devil. Adds to 6. Birth of Ishmael, day of reprobation and exile. 16, the blasted tower, day of Jacob and Asa. The day also of Jacob's predestination to Asa's ruin. The glittering star, fire from heaven burned Sodom and Gomorrah, day of salvation for the good and ruin for the Saturday, dangerous. It is under the dominion of Scorpion. 18, the moon, 9. Birth of Isaac, wife's triumph, day of conjugal affection and good hope. 19, the sun. Birth of Pharaoh, a beneficent or fatal day for the great of earth, according to the different merits of the great. 20, the judgment, birth of Jonas, the instrument of God's judgment, propitious for divine revelations. 21, the world, birth of Saul, material royalty, danger to mind and reason. 22, influence of Saturn, birth of Job, day of trial and suffering. Influence of Venus, birth of Benjamin, day of preference and tenderness. Influence of Jupiter, birth of Japhet. 25, influence of Mercury, 10th plague of Egypt. Transcendental Magic, don't read that part. 26, influence of Mars, deliverance of the Israelites and passage of the Red Sea. 27, influence of Diana or Hecate, splendid victory achieved by Judas Maccabeus. 28, influence of the sun, Samson carries off the gates of Gaza, day of strength and deliverance. 29, the fool of the tarot. 29, day of failure and miscarriage in all things. We see from this rabbinical table, which John Balot and others borrowed from the Hebrew Kabbalists, that these ancient masters concluded a posteriori from facts to presumable influences, which is completely within the logic of the occult sciences. We also see what diverse significations are included in the 22 letters which form the universal alphabet of the tarot, together with the truth of our assertions. When we say that all secrets of the Kabbalah and Magick, all mysteries of the elder world, all science of the patriarchs, all historical traditions of primeval times are enclosed in this hieroglyphic book of Thoth, Enoch, or Cadmus. An exceedingly simple method of finding celestial horoscopes by onomancy is that which we are about to describe. It harmonizes Gaffarel with our own views, and its results are most astounding in their exactitude and depth. Take a black card. Cut therein the name of the person for whom you wish to make the consultation. Place this card at the end of a table, which must diminish towards the eye of the observer. Then look through it alternately towards the 4 cardinal points, beginning at the east and finishing at the north. Take note of all the stars which you see through the letters. Convert these letters into numbers, and with the sum of the addition, write down in the same manner, renew the operation, then compute the number of stars you have. Next, adding this number to that of the name. Again, cast up and write the sum of the 2 numbers in Hebrew characters. Again, renew the operation, inscribe separately the stars which you have noticed, then find the names of all the stars in the planisphere, classifying them according to their size and brightness, choosing the most brilliant of all as the pole star of your astrological operation. Then find in the Egyptian planisphere the names and figures of the genii to which these stars belong. A good example of the planisphere will be found in the Atlas to the great work of Dupois. You will then know the fortunate and unfortunate signs, which enter into the name of the person and what is their influence, whether in childhood, which is the name traced in the east, in youth, which is the name traced at the south, in mature age, which is the name at the west, in decline, which is the name at the north, or finally, during the whole life, obtained from the stars which enter into the entire number formed by the addition of the letters and stars. This astrological operation is simple, easy, and requires few calculations. It connects with the highest antiquity and belongs evidently to primitive patriarchal magic, as will be seen by studying the works of Gaffarel and his master, Rabbi Comer. Onomantic astrology was practiced by the old Hebrew Kabbalists, as is proved from their observations, preserved by Rabbi Comer, Rabbi Kapol, Rabbi Abjudan, and other masters in Kabbalah. The menaces of the prophets, uttered against various nations, were based upon the characters of the stars found vertically over them in the permanent correspondence of the celestial and terrestrial spheres. Thus, by writing in the sky of Greece the Hebrew name of the country, and translating the numbers, they obtained the word which signifies destroyed and desolated. Karab. Oh, I see. Hence, they inferred that after a cycle of 12 periods, Greece would be destroyed and desolated. A short time before the sack of Jerusalem and its temple by Nabuzardan, the Kabbalists remarked 11 stars disposed in the following manner vertically above the temple. All these entered the word written from south to west, the term signifying reprobation and abandonment without mercy. The sum of the number of the letters is 423, exactly the period of the duration of the temple. Destruction threatened the empires of Persia and Assyria in the shape of 4 vertical stars which entered into the 3 letters Rove, and the fatal period indicated was 208 years. So also 4 stars announced to the Kabbalistic rabbins of another period the fallen division of the empire of Alexander. They entered into the word Pared, to divide, 284, the number of this word, indicating the entire duration of this empire, both as to root and branches. According to Rabbi Holmer, the destinies of the Ottoman power at Constantinople would be fixed and announced beforehand by 4 stars entering into the word Ka, signifying to be feeble, weak, and drawing to its end. The stars being more brilliant in the letter Aleph final indicated a capital and gave it the numerical value of 1,000. The three letters combined make 1025, which must be computed from the taking of Constantinople by Muhammad II, a calculation which still holds out several centuries of existence to the enfeebled empire of the sultans, at present sustained by all Europe combined. Wait, what? The main Thessalphares, which Balthazar, in his intoxication, saw written on the wall of his palace by the glare of the torches, was an onomantic intuition similar to that of the rabbins. Initiated, no doubt, by his Hebrew diviners in the reading of the stars, Balthazar operated mechanically and instinctively upon the lamps of his nocturnal feast, as he would upon the stars of heaven. The three words which he had formed in his imagination soon became indelible to his eyes and paled all the lights of his banquet. It was easy to predict an end like that of Sardanapalus to a king who abandoned himself to orgies in a besieged town. In conclusion, we have said and we repeat that magnetic intuitions alone give value and reality to all Kabbalistic and astrological calculations, puerile possibly and completely arbitrary when made without inspiration by cold curiosity and in the absence of a powerful will. The most complete set of talents and virtues is wholly useless in the absence of willpower and discipline. Folks. So basically, the moral of the story is the only tool you need is your consciousness. That's where we started, right? You know, I mean, these juxtapositions of celestial bodies could represent some sort of map, and I'm sure that they do. But more realistically, your belief is going to determine the experience that you derive from these influences more than anything. And that's kind of why I've always said that I sort of regard astrology as a bit of a waste of time to spend all of this energy learning all of this stuff when in reality you can just use your intuition and you really don't need any of that. If it's fun and interesting for you, then have at it, but it's not necessary. And there are probably more productive ways to invest your time. In fact, I kind of think that readings of that nature are sort of unethical on a lot of levels, even if they're accurate. It's really got little to do with it. Because the person that you're doing this for should be developing their own will, their own self-mastery, their own ability to determine what their experience is going to be. And this acquiescence, I guess, to sort of regard yourself as a victim of, or even the beneficiary of a confluence of forces is quite lame, if you ask me. So, and I bet that was kind of a surprise to people. You know, this book of Magick, here's the astrology part, and he's like, yeah, probably arbitrary and probably be better off just learning to control your beliefs and fears and hopes. Send these moon pages to Patreon. Just smoked some DMT and had the biggest deja vu. Nice. Have you read any of the Indian religious texts? Yes, many, many years ago. But not in a long, long time. I have pretty serious distrust of all institutionalized religion. By the way, you guys, it's Q&A time, so you have any... It's still relatively early, so if you have any questions or comments or things you would like me to weigh in on, this is our time for that. But yeah, I have pretty extreme distrust of like every aspect of every institutionalized religion, including Buddhism. Sikhism is probably the one that I haven't really found any issue with at all. You know, I don't know that much about it, but the general pretense of it seems fine. The rest of them, I think, are devices for control. When we were reading the Night Kadosh degree, or it might have been the 30th one, the one after it, he said that philosophical truth has always been the greatest enemy of Rome and the thing that they feared more than heresy, vice, or crime. And they were never at a loss to find ways to oppress free thought. And he was writing this in 1871, or that's when it was published, and referencing, much longer ago than that. So that is the objective of all of these things. For me, book study is no longer really relevant when it comes to spirituality. Spirituality is not about books. It is a living dialogue with the living universe. Book study is for music theory and chemistry and physics and mathematics. But after a certain point, it's going to do far more harm than it's going to do good. Once you have initiated even this dialogue with the universal mind, there's nothing more that is needed, and in my experience, the overwhelming majority of books that are written on these subjects are just absolute garbage. They're just head cheese, things that people think that have no basis in reality in any way, shape, or form, In fact, it's kind of the opposite. If you look at the Bible, which was predicated on stories that were Kabbalistic and astrological and historical and were always meant to be allegorical. And then they're repurposed and recontextualized in this way that completely distorts their original meanings and sort of disenfranchises them from any connection to substance that they once had. They're doing far more harm than good. You're doing far more harm than good by exposing yourself to it. There's nothing to be gained from it. You read the entire Bible and tell me one thing in there, one fucking thing, other than love your neighbor as you would love yourself, that is of any fucking use or value in what, like 1,152 pages or something? That's it. Like, you're going to read that whole fucking pile of toilet paper and that's all you're going to get out of it, And my son knew that when he was born. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, yeah. So I don't read that stuff. Do I have experience with sigil magic? Not particularly. I like I said, in my world, I kind of feel like the only tool you need is your consciousness. But most of the efficacy of what we call magic actually comes from manipulations of the instrument that determines the manner of the interface. It's like a filter, our mind, for the electromagnetic field interaction that translates our thoughts into substantial reality. Right. So one of the main premises of ceremonial magic, ritual magic, is actually the ability to condense information, a lot of information, into a single small symbol. Right. And there's a lot of utility in that because, for one thing, you're training the mind not to read things on the surface level, but you have like multiple layers of interpretation happening all the time after sufficient training, right? So that's hugely helpful. And then sigil magic, kind of the idea is the same, that you're compressing a large amount of information into a very small space. And that is what happens when the universe is created, right? If the quantum loop theory is correct and the Hindus have this idea of the blinking of the eye of Shiva, opening of the eye of Shiva. Hermetic also, the phoenix is another version of this. But the idea is that once the universe reaches its maximum point of expansion and has exhausted all the possibilities that are available to it without overriding any of the constraints or strictures imposed upon it by natural law, it reverses systole and diastole, expansion, contraction. And when it contracts, all of the symbols, all of the particles remain the same size, no matter how small the little energy packet becomes. And then at a certain point, the energy that is contained within that infinitely small speck is so great that it reverses with such tremendous velocity that a fucking universe is created. So sigil magic is the same concept on a piece of paper, you know, and you're trying to internalize this process of creation, encoding it within the mind and creating a singularity for this event in order to precipitate it. Is prayer magic? It depends on what you mean by prayer. For example, in the Shuar ayahuasca tradition, we're taught to send your prayer directly at the thing you wish to influence. Because if you're sending it off to some spirit or sky zombie or whatever that doesn't actually exist, it's just gunpowder lost in the void. You know, it doesn't have any, or steam with no pipe to funnel it, or you know what I mean? So I would say no, because I don't think that we have any cause to supplicate, the word I'm looking for, you know, to placate to the God of the universe is crystallized, it's frozen into its creation. It cannot override any of the laws, it cannot reverse any of its own processes, right? If it did, the whole thing would come undone. Can't do it. Even if it exists at the current moment, it might as well not, in a sense. So we are that God anyways, and we are directing our will towards our object of desire, or what, you know, the healing or whatever thing it is. So I don't think I would ever call it prayer, no. It is our responsibility. That's why we were given sovereignty, you know? I mean, it's, you are the God you're looking for. If you're praying to yourself. So, at least in my opinion. And then panpsychism is obviously the truth, you know, but to what extent we mean that, that's more limited, you know. The evidence for the existence of a, not only teleology, but a subtly active intelligence in processes like morphology is pretty overwhelming at this point. You know, we've observed context aware adaptations in even a tree at this point, and there's no way the tree could be aware that it needs to get rid of this tannin, or it's going to keep getting cut down until it's extinct. The tree couldn't know that. So something that could know that, and also these adaptations are happening very rapidly, like in a matter of like seasons. So it implies that whatever has oversight in the evolutionary process is context aware as well. So you know what I mean? The organism couldn't know what it needs to do, and it's time sensitive. Then we have also evidence for electromagnetism as the basis of our consciousness and intelligence, and we have evidence of, you know, quantum consciousness and non-neural cognition and all these things. So there's no reason, nothing about panpsychism is inconsistent with science in this moment, you know. The fact that this is not bigger news is pretty disturbing, but not surprising. There's enough that has emerged around that subject in the last couple of years that it really represents a necessity for a near complete restructuring of the accepted, institutionally approved, institution approved ontological model, and people acting like it's not happening. I mean, I've heard a number of physicists over the last couple of years say that life could not have come from dead stuff. It didn't happen. There's no way it happened. So whatever the organizing principle is, whatever life, that life force is, has always existed. According to physics. I mean, the way I understand it, the reason these physicists are arguing this is that it's not consistent with physics that life came from dead things. That's not consistent with science. So we have this issue of having an entire ontological model that was based on fundamentally false fundamental assumptions. The foundation of it is flawed, and so now it has reached such heights that it has surpassed the stars, but with a faulty foundation, and now the wind's fucking blowing. So the Tower of Satan, the blasted tower, finna fall, y'all. Like nowish, I mean, the every single modern empire, like I think it's like 1,000 years or something, has lasted between 247 and 251 years, and the United States is 250 next year, I think. Time for a shift. And this isn't like, numerology or something. This is like statistical probabilities of close to 100%. All right, y'all. Well, it is 12 midnight. I'm not seeing a bunch of questions pouring into the chat, so I will be back tomorrow night. We're going to talk about living with contradiction, how everything contains contradiction, and what we need to do with that, and what the necessity of it is. And I'm going to try to really start taking a shift in this channel in the next couple of weeks towards action, because I've been talking a lot about theory, mostly about theory, for a long time. And now that we've got all that established, it's time to talk about practice. So cheers, guys. Appreciate you all so much. Hope you have enjoyed this and learned something. And please consider supporting the channel via Patreon, or there are options in every video description and in the chat, PayPal and Cash App and all that stuff. Demonetized. So you are our support, and I'll see you tomorrow night.